Good morning, students. Today we will start our second chapter from Indian politics. Okay, we have studied about challenges of nation building. The first chapter, that is after independence, right? After independence, what were the problems faced by the government of India in order to have a united nation? Now we will discuss after that, after the challenges of nation. Another problem was, we have discussed three challenges. One is to establish a united nation, and the second one was democracy, right? So in this chapter we will study about democracy and all. Okay, the name of the second chapter is Era of One Party Dominance. All of you must have idea about dominance because we have already discussed one chapter from world politics, that is US dominance, US hegemony in the world politics. US has dominated the whole world. Similarly, in India also there was one party which has dominated India, and all of you must have the idea of the name of that party. That party is the Congress Party. So first of all, let's discuss about what happened after independence, how the democracy has been established in India. So there were many other countries which got liberation from colonialism, or they got independence from colonialism, but it was very difficult to establish democracy in every country, right? Many countries seriously thought about democracy, but they were not able to establish democracy, and many were thinking that national unity was their first choice. They wanted to establish national unity, but in the name of democracy, they always wanted to have a control by one leader, one party rule, or direct army rule. But to establish democracy, it was a very, very difficult task for other countries who got their independence. But in India, the Indian leaders always wanted to have democracy. After independence, the main focus of freedom struggle during that time was that after independence they will establish democracy in all over India. So this was the time to utilize democracy, to establish democracy. They have already written rules and regulation and everything, like we have studied constitution in class 11 also, the drafting of constitution. In that drafting of constitution, they have written all about rules and regulation and everything about democracy. Now they have to put into force. This democracy has to be came into force. Okay, so we have already discussed about the drafting of constitution. The constitution was adopted on 26th November 1949, signed on 24th January 1950, and it came into effect on 26th January 1950. Please remember the dates and the year of Constituent Assembly. Okay. The constitution has laid down the rules. Now the machine had to be put in place. The constitution has given all the rights, all the rules and regulation, everything. Constitution was ready. Now the leaders or the people have to utilize that rules and regulation that should came into force. So the first part was election. In a democracy, what is democracy? Democracy is a form of government by the people, for the people, of the people. Now, what do you understand by the people, for the people, of the people? Means, if there was an election and if there was a representative of the common people, that representative will rule the country, and through that representatives, the common people are ruling the country. That is called democracy. So it is very, very necessary to have election, to have free and fair election in every democratic country. And it was not a difficult, it was a very, very difficult task for India. Like India was a a highly populated country plus poor country. Our country was very very poor at the time of independence, plus the literacy rate was very low at that time. People were, maximum number of people were illiterate. So in such a situation, the government has to adopt democracy. There should be a free and fair election. That was a challenge for the leaders of India. Now, the Election Commission of India was set up in January 1950. Sukumar Sen became the first Chief Election Commissioner. The country's first general election were expected sometime in 1950 itself. So, after independence, when the constitution was ready, a constitution came into force on 26th January 1950. So now there should be an election. So in order to have election, there should be an election commissioner. We have already discussed about this election commission in class 11 also, right? So the first election commissioner was Sukumar Sen, and they thought that the leaders were thinking that there would be an election nearly in 1950 itself, but that has not happened during that time. In order to have a free and fair election in a country, India's because of the size of India, because of the population size, illiteracy, and plus economically also India was very poor. So that was going to be the hardest work for the leaders or for the election commissioner. It also required preparing the electoral rolls or the list of all the citizens eligible to vote. In order to have election, there should be electoral vote, right? We have discussed this. Who are the electorals? The common people. There should be a proper name. There should be a proper number of people. So when the election commission first they drafted the electoral rules, at that time 40 lakhs women were not recorded. They were recorded as the wife of this and this or the daughter of this and this. Their names were not enlisted in that list. So the election commission rejected that list. Election commission wanted a new list with the name of women also, because they are also the citizen of India. The government wanted to have full democracy where each and every common people will have the right to vote. The government wanted to they wanted to have universal adult franchise. You know what is universal adult franchise, right? Universal adult franchise is the right to vote by every common people at or above the age of 18. So 40 lakhs women were not recorded at that time. Their names were not recorded. So the election commission rejected that list, and the election commission wanted another list to be prepared, because there were 70 crore population during that time, including women, including all the men, eligible voters. And out of 17 crore population, 3,200 MLAs, 489 MPs that should be elected from each state. So in order to have that election, boundary should also be drawn, right? Every state has their own rules, every state has their own party, so the boundaries has to be done. Voters list has to be ready. Whoever is campaigning, they should be ready. So it was not easy task, because already initially they were thinking that during 1950s there would be a first general election, but the election has to be postponed because of all this matter, boundary list and everything. Okay, and during that time only 15% of the people out of 17 crore population, 15% of the people were literate. That time only the two countries, Europe and America, they were having democracy and they were having election, and India was the first. They wanted to utilize universal adult franchise. Now, it being the every other countries or newspaper or magazine, they have said so many things against election commission. It's not easy to hold an election. They are foolish. They are the fool people. They wanted to have universal adult franchise because the number of population are illiterate, and in poor country it's not possible to have universal adult franchise. People cannot vote. So all these types of questions were raised, all these types of compliments were given to the election commission. But the election commission, our country, hold its first general election. They were ready with the election. It is also called, the first general election were called, as an Indian editor called it, the biggest gamble in the history. Now the biggest gamble was going to happen in India. The election had to postpone twice and finally held from October 1951 to February 1952. But this election is referred to as 1952 election, since most part of the country voted in January 1950. So in order to have preparation and everything, the election has to be postponed twice, and finally the election were held in India from October 1951 to February 1952. But they named it as 1952 election because maximum number of the states, they held election in 1952. It took 6 months for the campaigning, polling and counting to be completed, almost 6 months. And the parties who were the losers at that time, they also thought that this election was the most free and fair election of the history of India. And India's general election of 1952 became a landmark in the history of democracy all over the world. It was no longer possible to argue that democratic election could not be held in condition of poverty or lack of education. It proved that democracy could be practiced anywhere in the world. Because of the election, because of the general election, first general election of India, it was said that it is possible to have democracy in anywhere in the world. There should be they can have democracy, whether it's a populated country, whether it's a poor country, whether it's an illiterate country. Democracy is possible, and this has been proved by the first general election of India. So this was all about the election, 1952's first general election. And in our next class we will discuss about the winning party. Who was the first winning party? That was Congress party. They won the election in 1952. So this was all about election. Okay. So in our next class we will discuss about the party, the first party, Congress dominance in the first 3 general election. Okay. Till then, take care and please read, learn. Okay.